After centuries of close ties, Orthodox churches in Ukraine have cut ties with Russia. Moscow is warning of dire consequences, but what's triggered the split and was it politically motivated? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. The Eastern Orthodox Church has over 250 million members around the world. Its spiritual leader is based in Istanbul. But for followers in Ukraine, there is a newfound independence. Churches there have officially cut ties with their Russian branch, accusing it of what they call pro-Moscow propaganda. The decision has angered Russian leaders. We'll bring in our guests in a moment, but first, Mohammed Jamjoom sets up our discussion from Moscow.
Bartholomew I, the leader of the Eastern Orthodox Church and a man at the center of what's being described as potentially one of the biggest rifts in Christianity in recent times. With his signature on Saturday, he officially split most of Ukraine's Orthodox churches from centuries of Russian jurisdiction. On Sunday, during a service in the Turkish city of Istanbul to mark the Orthodox feast day of Epiphany, the document for the separation, also known as the Tomos, was officially handed over to the leader of the now independent Ukrainian Orthodox churches. Watching from the side, Petro Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president. He's pushed for Ukraine's Orthodox churches to split from what he and others have described as Russian influence and propaganda. Ukraine's churches have been under pressure to sever ties since the country became independent after the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. And that pressure has been getting stronger since Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. Ukraine imposed martial law in November, saying it feared a full-scale invasion after Russia captured 3 of its vessels in the Kerch Strait.
And the Tomos for us is actually another act of proclaiming Ukraine's independence. It will complete the assertion of independence of the Ukrainian state, strengthen religious freedom and interconfessional peace. It will strengthen the rights and freedoms of citizens.
In Moscow, political analysts say this is as much about politics as it is about religion.
The impact of a church split on relations between Russia and Ukraine is a weakening of the positions of Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine, and the long way run to the independence of Ukrainian Orthodoxy and of Ukrainian state from Russian influence in general.
The split has been largely boycotted by Ukraine's largest Orthodox church, which remains loyal to Russia. Moscow and the Russian branch of the church have also cut ties with Istanbul, which is regarded as the center of the Eastern Orthodox faith. It's unclear how all this will ultimately play out, but for many in Ukraine, the creation of an Orthodox church independent from Moscow is a momentous step toward Ukraine's political independence from Russia. Mohammed Jamjoom, Jazeera, Moscow.
Well, let's take a closer look at the Eastern Orthodox Church now. It's one of the oldest religious institutions and second largest after the Roman Catholic Church. It has more than 250 million members around the world, most of whom live in Eastern Europe, Greece, the Caucasus, and parts of the Middle East and Africa. Orthodox churches are self-governed, but the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, based in Istanbul, is its spiritual leader. Well, let's bring in our guests now. Joining us from Kiev is Valentin Yakushik, Professor of Political Science at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. In London is Marat, Shterin, Professor of Sociology of Religion and Department Head of Theology and Religious Studies at King's College London. And joining us on Skype from Moscow is Alexander Bratersky, Senior Foreign Policy at Gazeta.ru. That's a Russian newspaper. A very warm welcome to all of you. Let me start with Mr. Shterin in London. Are we seeing the biggest schism in Christianity in hundreds, if not 1,000 years?
It's obviously not the biggest schism in Christianity. Moreover, I would be very careful about using the word schism because it has very kind of derogatory connotations within the Orthodoxy and Christianity in general. You know, it means kind of the lowest hubris, if you like. It's about all the national churches within the Orthodox tradition have a degree of independence, and this is how they actually have coexisted for years. So I hope the current situation will not lead to the split, but eventually to the more kind of balance within Eastern Orthodoxy.
Mr. Yakushik, why do you think that the Patriarch in Constantinople is granting autonomy to Ukraine, and how much of Patriarch Bartholomew's decision is based on religion and how much of it is political?
Well, it is definitely a political step. There is not much of religion according to canonical traditions. Ecumenical patriarch couldn't have broken the agreement of 330 and something else years old. And dispossess Russian Patriarchate of its legal right to operate in Ukraine. But it was done. It's a political step and it's logical because Ecumenical Patriarchate from Istanbul was approached many times by Ukrainian political leaders who wanted to add to Ukrainian political independence also some signs of being separate from Russian church with the center in Moscow. As political step, it leads to two most important results. One, that part of Ukrainian Orthodox Church was split from Ukraine in 1992, now becomes canonical. So it means that all their religious services have value from the religious point of view. Before, when the Ukrainian two split away churches were not under the aegis of ecumenical patriarchate, all what they were doing, it was questioned by many Christians here if there is a religious validity. So this is one important issue, that further services of these two Ukrainian Orthodox churches, which united now, will have value according to religious standards. But in other aspect, it leads, this decision of ecumenical patriarch from Istanbul leads to split, political split in the world Orthodox Christianity. Now his step was not supported by any other church. Maybe it will be supported by Georgian or by Albanian or maybe by Bulgarian, but the rest are not supporting it and think that it is an invasion on Russian Orthodox Church canonical territory. So we have these two results.
And could that lead, to what I referred to as a schism earlier? The fact that the Orthodox Church, which has, some 300 million followers, the Russians have said that they're going to break off relations with Constantinople because of this decision. Mr. Bratersky, how are the other Orthodox churches going to deal with this decision? Do they feel any pressure to align themselves with either Constantinople or with Moscow?
Oh, of course, the situation is very difficult for now to decide. I think actually all will depend from Father Kirill, the head of a Russian Orthodox Church diplomacy. He's a very complicated figure, very connected to Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, but also himself is sort of a very powerful player. So all will depend from his diplomacy, how he will deal with those countries. Of course, he will be, consulted with their, church diplomats, because it's very important. If Russian Orthodox Church would demonstrate relationship with the churches, let's say, of Serbia, which is an ally of Russia, with Bulgaria, which is EU country, Greece, which is very close to Russia historically and religiously, it will be a very big blow, not to the church itself also, but to the Russian state. So I think for him, it's now the time to craft a very shy diplomacy, to work for those countries. Otherwise, his position will be weakened, and it's already weakened.
And we've heard from him already, and he has not been diplomatic. He sent Constantinople's Patriarch Bartholomew a very harshly worded letter saying things like, "You will forever lose the possibility of serving the unity of God's holy churches. You'll cease to be the first in the Orthodox world, and the suffering you cause to Orthodox Ukrainians will follow you to the last judgment." Mr. Shterin, is this damaging and divisive for Christianity?
In fact, we can see this, we can observe with probably a lot of concern this inflammatory rhetoric from both sides. And I can understand why. It's a huge blow, it's a huge challenge for the Russian Orthodox Church, which has about probably between 30 and 35% of all its parishes in Ukraine. And for a number of diplomatic reasons, which my colleagues have just identified. Also, it's a big problem, obviously, a challenge now for the Ukrainian church and for the Ukrainian state, how it would go about. We're only at the beginning of creating this new church, and this church and the Ukrainian state will have to deal with a number of challenges. So I understand this rhetoric, in particular if we take account of the geopolitical context. But I do hope that behind this rhetoric, there is a kind of realization that we need to take care of the ordinary people, ordinary believers, of the political implications of this. And that's my hope that might result actually in, if you like, patching up this relationship between the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the independent church, and the Moscow Patriarchate, and all the ramifications for other Orthodox churches. I hope the word diplomacy that Alexander has just used will be key to the situation.
Mr. Yakushik, we've got Ukraine's security service at the moment investigating, interrogating even priests who are loyal to the Russian Orthodoxy. I know that our other guests are talking about diplomacy, but if we look at what's happening on the ground, is this going to provoke Russia? How much is this going to provoke Russia, do you think?
Well, you see, if Ukrainian security service is doing something to pressure on the clergy, they're not doing it very seriously because they know that in 3 months' time there will be elections, and they cannot fully support the illegal, anti-constitutional intervention into religious affairs. So please don't be afraid of something very serious happen. It's more political game on Ukrainian establishment as well. As politicians are using religious matters as a tool in the elections, the same is with the security service. And I would say that for you, probably the audience, the international audience, would be interesting to know what it means in your own context, what is happening in Ukraine. It's as if in America, there is unification of these Christians who support Mr. Trump, and on the other side, those who support Mrs. Clinton and Democrats. And if American government would act on one side or establishment in supporting one part or another part of these politically divided nations, Ukrainian authorities have chosen this way of supporting one part of our culturally and politically divided society. And what is interesting, that among initiators of this support of the governmental support of reunification of two churches, which were not considered to be canonical and which became now canonical, there are many Jews, there are many Muslims, and they are Catholics and Greek Catholics. So you can, I think, imagine what kind of process it is. I'm sure that after the elections, this kind of political game will be settled, and religious matters will be left for religious people, and political matters will be just for parties, not for churches. Now, several churches act as political parties inside Ukraine and worldwide.
And that is why Ukrainian authorities have been, and not just authorities, but actually the Ukrainian churches have been asking for autonomy, because they say that, you know, the Moscow-backed churches in Ukraine are a Kremlin tool to spread propaganda, and that they're even, you know, supporting fighters in the east in a conflict that's killed more than 10,000 people. Is there any truth to that, Mr. Bratersky?
Well, I would say partly there might be some truth, but I don't think so that the church official, church people on the ground, the simple priest, either they are loyal to Ukrainian church, either they are loyal to Russian church, are actually, you know, doing something like that. They're actually they're concerned about what the well-being of the people who are actually working, because unfortunately in Russia there's always an image of this, you know, a guy, even in Ukraine as well, the guy who drives a luxury Mercedes and has golden stuff on him. There's a priest. There are also a lot of ordinary priests who also work hard for their own people. So they are not really interested in political games. I can tell you something. Today I was in the church, and like our father Victor, he was very calm. He did not mention anything bad. He just said we pray for all Christians. So I think the position, the calm position of those people, the people on the ground, are not connected to Putin or Poroshenko and their own political games. They are actually, I think they're doing whatever they can for the sake of the human, because unfortunately, when the relationship between Ukraine and Russia are in a very bad shape, the Christianity and the unity, of our religion is the only thing which unites us.
Mr. Shterin, as we've been hearing, there is a very important election coming up in Ukraine, and we've had President Petro Poroshenko, you know, in Constantinople for this decision by the Patriarch. Is this going to be, do you think, how much is this, you know, newfound autonomy going to boost President Petro Poroshenko as he faces this election battle?
I'm not an expert on Ukrainian politics, but obviously I know something about it, and having relatives in Ukraine, actually, and Moscow as well, I'm following the situation. Well, I want to make a general comment on what we have just heard. The establishment of independent churches has always been a political process. In history, it has always been the case. We can't really separate religion and politics in this particular case. And obviously, President Poroshenko, like probably any other president in a country where you've got a clear sort of dominant religious tradition, such as Orthodoxy, would use, you know, this situation for political gains. This is not to justify or criticize. This is just kind of real politics, if you like. And obviously, he is going to use his success in securing this Thomas from the ecumenical patriarch. He probably even downplays some of the aspects of this Thomas. It's quite an interesting, actually, document, which, among other things, limits the authority of the new church, for example, in having parishes abroad. Or, on the other hand, it also limits its authority in having the title of the head of the church. It's supposed to be metropolitan, not the patriarch. It's quite an interesting development. So Poroshenko is going probably to play down those aspects. But there is no doubt that he is going to use it, and the political forces behind it, quite understandably, they will going to use it to their advantage in the election.
And there's also, you know, going forward now, there's the sort of what happens to the churches in Ukraine, the distribution of property of the churches, and we've had some very serious words from President Putin, actually, who's been warning that any redistribution of church property could result in a heavy dispute, if not bloodshed. Mr. Yakushik, how do you see this playing out? Can this be settled in a way that won't involve violence?
So, first of all, I should mention that it's not about autonomy of Ukrainian church. Ukrainian church was always autonomous. And Ukrainian church, which is in connection with Russian Patriarchate, has more now autonomous rights than the church which now goes under the auspices of Constantinople. So this is first issue. It's about splitting from Russia official policy in all possible spheres, in cultural, traditional, economic, and so on. And it is also a business issue because churches have well, a lot of estate. And now Ecumenical Patriarch wants to get hundreds of churches in Ukraine as a gift. And definitely this is a very big, he won a lot, a big victory for him. But we will see how Ukrainian, even anti-Russian clergymen, how they will react. They are already looking at the churches which they lose as something which they should have kept for themselves. And in a couple of months' time, we will see a lot of discontent on the part of Ukrainian clergy who now separated from Russia officially, that they are not happy with the control from Istanbul in many different areas. So, okay, churches in one issue, others, the autonomy, real autonomy. Now, Mr. Poroshenko reached the legitimization of split away churches, but he cannot reach the result of destroying that part of the church which is in connection with Russia. At least 1/3 of Ukrainians will continue to be loyal to their brothers in Belarus and in Russia and all over the world. And by the way, what is interesting, the decision of Ecumenical Patriarchate, he made Ukrainian independent from Russia church not be able to have their parishes abroad. All these parishes which they had will have to pass directly to Constantinople.
Right.
Very good business, very good result.
Mr. Bratersky, I want to come to you now because we've had Ukraine's security service chief warning that Putin could use what's happening now as a pretext for open military invasion. What do you make of that?
I think it's actually election rhetoric. I'm not a big fan of President Putin, but I think he's too cautious to do that. I mean, he might actually do some. He's very reserved in many cases, and I don't think so. You will be willing to do that because the economic situation in Russia is not really good. Also, you know, I mean, even there's a rhetoric and there's something like the Russians have against, let's say, the political people within the Ukrainian establishment. You know, I don't think so that Russians are going to fight against their brother in religion as far as this is concerned. It's one thing to support separatists in Eastern Donbass. Maybe I'm not justifying this step, but it's one thing. But I don't think so. I mean, there are a lot of people from both sides, the military people, that just using this rhetoric. I don't think so. Something like this is gonna happen. I mean, we have 1 week of New Year holidays. Nothing happened anywhere. Everything was much more calm. So I don't think something is gonna happen.
All right, Mr. Shterin, what happens now? History tells us these splits are very messy, but from what all of you are saying, that doesn't have to be the case here.
Well, I don't want to play prophet in this particular situation, but as I've already said, I hope that we have to recognize the reality of the situation. I hope there will be good, real politics involved in that. I hope the inflammatory rhetoric, which probably will inevitably to continue for some time, will eventually subside, and the reality of the situation will be recognized, and the care will be taken by both sides for the ordinary believers, ordinary parishioners. I hope that the Moscow Patriarchate will actually recognize the new situation. On the other hand, I also hope that the Ukrainian state will respect its own new independent church and gives it real independence and allow it to develop, along more kind of enlightened lines and respect the freedom of religion in general.
All right, well, we will have to end it on that hopeful note. I want to thank all of our guests. That is Marat Shterin in London. We have Valentin Yakushik in Kiev and Alexander Bratersky in Moscow. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.